Welcome to Follow to Lead, where we discover how to listen for and follow God's call so that we might lead others to God. Our shared stories of inspiration from religious leaders and those active in the educational ministry of the church can help you know better how God is calling you and the role passionate Catholic education plays in spreading His message of faith, hope, and love. Now please welcome the hosts of Follow to Lead, Father Randy Sly and Kyle Pietrantonio.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Christ the teacher, teach us to listen. Teach us to do the deep listening to the sounds of our soul, waiting to hear your voice calling us to cast out deeper, to become fishers of men and women, shepherds of souls, to follow your will in order to lead others to the truth, beauty, and goodness only you can offer. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Welcome to Follow to Lead, a journey twice a month into the world of Catholic education and our faith, exploring what it means to follow God in order to lead others to Him. I'm Father Randy Sly, your host, and today we'll be talking with Jeremy Tate, the founder and CEO of the Classic Learning Test, which is one of our strategic partners here at the Duke and Altum Schools Collaborative. Jeremy is also a national leader in the revival of classical education. He's been featured on Fox News, MSNBC, the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Inside Higher Ed, and the New York Times. And prior to founding CLT, Jeremy served as Director of College Counseling at Mount DeSales Academy in Catonsville, Maryland. He received his Bachelor of Science in Secondary Education from Louisiana State University and a Master's in Religious Studies from Reformed Theological Seminary. Jeremy and his wife, Erin, reside in Annapolis, Maryland, with their 6 children. So, Jeremy, welcome to the program.
Father Sly, I'm excited to be here. Great to see you.
And what we like to do with each program is start by giving our guests an opportunity to just kind of introduce themselves and tell a little bit about their background and upbringing. So what can you tell us about Jeremy Tate?
Yeah, Father, I did not grow up Catholic. I grew up Methodist. Did you grow up Methodist? I know you were ordained Methodist.
Yeah, I was a Methodist pastor for some years, yeah.
Yeah, mostly Methodist, and I really internalized the gospel at a Young Life camp going into my senior year in high school, and it was chasing all the wrong things as a high school student. And at a Young Life camp, heard kind of the whole gospel story in terms of the way sin has separated us from a relationship with God. Gave my life to Christ at Lake Champion in New York in 1999. And I remember they said that churches were kind of like ice cream, 31 flavors. It's all ice cream, but you kind of pick what you like. And I remember even then thinking that didn't sound quite right, but what do I know? I'm 18 years old, and so I was kind of on a journey for the fullness of the truth. The last place I ever thought to look would be the Catholic Church. I at least knew they were wrong. I grew up in a Protestant enough home to know that the Catholics were weird. And the only Catholic I actually knew was my aunt, who was pretty weird. So I was like, I'm going to keep my distance. The last place I would look. And then I went to seminary and read my way into the Catholic Church. And I started with the ancient church history class and reading the fathers. And I remember sitting in class and thinking, they don't seem very Calvinist to me. They don't seem very Protestant. They're so focused on the Eucharist. They clearly venerate Mary, even their earliest accounts and centuries after the resurrection. And so, 2010, I came into full communion in the Catholic Church. I believe you were 2006. You have your 20-year anniversary coming up.
Right.
But it's been amazing to raise a family in the church. And, I think one of the things I love so much about Catholicism is the way it is so deeply immersed in history. And it is, I believe Chesterton, says that only the Catholic Church can save a man from being a child of his own generation. And I have found that so true. So 15 years in, and I'm struggling to be a faithful Catholic, as we all are, but loving the sacramental life and the grace that we're given. the access to Christ, especially in the Eucharist.
So what kind of led you on your career path? You began, I believe, as a college counselor at Mount DeSales. What did you kind of find yourself being led into Catholic education, or how did that happen?
Yeah, when I converted to Catholicism in 2010, I really wanted to move into an authentically Catholic environment. And I ended up at Mount DeSales Academy, a school run by the Nashville Dominicans. I'd already spent 3 years teaching in inner city New York, 3 years teaching in a couple suburban schools in Maryland. And but I was excited to get into a faithfully Catholic school. So I arrived at Mount DeSales in 2014. And that's really where I got there, Father, and so many wonderful things I could say about Mount DeSales Academy, truly wonderful, and the Dominican sisters. But I was pretty shocked with the power and influence of the college board at that school.
Hmm.
And I was coming in as an outsider, and I thought, this is crazy. We have a aggressively secular, not Catholic organization that's kind of calling the shots
Hmm.
in terms of what our students are doing.
Yeah, and that course is a perfect segue into talking about what you're doing now with the classic learning test. And of course, Catonsville, whenever I think of Catonsville, I think of the beautiful sisters there that were Anglican and came into the Catholic Church.
Uh-huh.
And what a beautiful order they are out there. And when I was president of St. Michael High School, we had Dominican sisters from Ann Arbor on our campus. And again, the Dominicans, and I knew it was the same way at Mount DeSales, they just bring such life and vigor to the campus wherever they are. So that's a beautiful environment.
Yeah, it was.
So let's get into the classic learning test. Now, some in our audience may not be familiar with what you're doing. Can you kind of give us a genesis? You've told us that you had an encounter with the college board. Now, I think they've been around since like 1926.
Yeah, well, the first SAT was 1926. The College Board actually was founded at Columbia University in 1899. So they've been
Wow.
around now for 125, 126 years. But yeah, so I got to this Catholic school in 2014, and I was just genuinely surprised with the influence of the College Board. Here's one way that it showed up. This lovely sister, Sister Mary Bridget, was introducing two new elective classes my first year there or second year there. One was an intro to Christian apologetics. The other was an intro to philosophy. And I was, as a recent seminary graduate and convert, I was talking to Sister about the course sequence and the texts and the authors, and we were both so excited. And then registration time came, and hardly any students signed up. And I was a college counselor, and I was, talking to the students, why didn't you want to take the philosophy class? These are the greatest questions any human can ask. What is the good life? What is human happiness? And I heard time and time again, Mr. Tate, it's not any AP points. It'll hurt
Yep.
my GPA. And I remember thinking, this is crazy. We can't get our faithfully Catholic kids at a faithfully Catholic school to take the classes we care about most because of the power and influence of a testing company in New York City.
Hmm.
It seemed just absolutely bizarre. So it started as just a dream of what if, and I was also running an SAT, ACT prep company, and I saw what they were doing there, where they were essentially censoring the Western intellectual tradition.
Right.
I think it's one of the few ideas that almost every teacher agrees on, is that in education, for better or worse, testing will drive and shape curriculum to some degree. And so if you imagine as a hypothetical, imagine if the SAT and ACT students always knew, well, that's what we're going to have to grapple with St. Thomas. That's where we're going to possibly read Dante or Boethius. Imagine the impact of that, right? But instead, we've had the opposite. We've had the most influential testing companies in the country censoring the Catholic intellectual tradition as if it doesn't exist.
Right.
When in reality, we wrote all the best philosophy, all the best literature. you can't be a seriously educated person without at least being fluent in the Catholic intellectual tradition. And so it began as a dream of what if there was an alternative to the College Board that instead of driving schools away from the Catholic intellectual tradition, was instead having the opposite impact, driving schools towards this tradition and a fluency in this tradition instead.
We have, of course, in most of our schools, you've got the SAT, but then it was in 1959, the ACT came along,
That's right. Yes.
and uh, they really were more focused, even more so on academic achievement, practical knowledge. So basically, you had to teach to the test.
Yes. So this is it's funny. I mean, you would think at the surface like what could be more boring than talking about, the history of standardized testing? I think it's so fascinating, right? So, the SAT is actually it actually comes out of what was called the Army Alpha Test in World War One, and they were using that test essentially to figure out who they were going to send to the front lines in World War One
Uh huh.
because they didn't want to measure acquire knowledge. They wanted to learn to measure cognitive ability,
Right.
essentially aptitude. And if you did well, you're going to be back in intelligence, and if you didn't do well, you're going to the front lines. So talk about a high stakes testing
Oh
scenario.
my word. Yeah.
Well, they use that same kind of pseudoscience to create the SAT in 1926. And it's basically a pretty obscure test until after World War II when the GI Bill and we've got a huge surge of college applicants, and quickly college admission becomes selective. And the SAT is the already existing sorting mechanism for who's going to get in, who's going to get out. Colleges quickly become very selective, and the SAT then becomes a household name in the 1940s. But the ACT launches in 59, as you said, with a critique. And they say this isn't fair. A student should not be tested on their innate cognitive ability, what they can't even control. They should be tested on what they are taught in the classroom. And people hear that argument and they're like, yeah, totally. That makes so much more sense. The context is also Sputnik and the space race and fears about the Soviets getting ahead of us in math and science. But what people often were not asking was, well, what school are we talking about? If they're being measured, assessed on what they're taught in the classroom, is this a Jewish day school, a Montessori school, a classical school, a Catholic school, homeschool? And it became crystal clear over time that we were talking about a public school. And it became very clear in 2015 when both the SAT and the ACT aligned formally with the Common Core standards to
Right.
make it very clear that these tests are designed to measure mastery achievement of a public school standards and curriculum.
So basically, you can uh, achieve a high score on these tests just by retaining the information that you're taught in the classroom, but it really doesn't say anything about your human formation. It doesn't say anything about your understanding of life, those types of things. Is that
Yeah,
where?
and totally. And I think this ultimately gets back to this question of like, what does it even mean to be educated? Right.
Hmm.
I think this is a question most teachers don't grapple with enough. I had taught for 7 years before I was like, what even is education? Right. And I think it's interesting to me that in the Catholic tradition, we often didn't call it education. We often called it formation rather than education. He's being sent off to formation. She's being sent off to formation. Because it was two things I think that the Catholic tradition was always getting at. One was the cultivation of virtue, the intellectual virtues, the virtues of the heart, but also it was the passing down of this intellectual inheritance, right? A fluency with the Catholic philosophical and literary tradition as well, and also the Catholic Church as the great preserver of the pagan classics, the Iliad, the Odyssey, these kinds of texts that are the shared human stories that we all love.
So with the classic learning test, uh, what uh, what are your what are the subjects and the structure that you're using? Are you discounting like the STEM classes, or is that still a part of what you're doing, or how is that? How are you differentiating yourself?
Yeah, such a great question. So CLT is very simple. It's unchanging, always the same format. It's been the same way for 10 years. 120 questions, 120 minutes. And it starts off with a verbal reasoning section. And here the big differentiator is that instead of reading modern passages that are often boring, if not politically biased, instead they might be reading something from the Federalist Papers, maybe something from one of America's founders or one of the philosophers who contributed to America's founding. Maybe they're reading something going back as far as Plato or Aristotle. You rarely see anything on the SAT or ACT before the beginning of the 20th century. So the first part of the CLT is a verbal reasoning section, but based off reading passages that have stood the test of time. Because our argument is that that is a mark of an educated person if you're able to read the best of what has been thought and said and understand it. The second thing we're asking students to do is a grammar writing section. And here it's fairly similar to at least the older versions of the SAT, where students are being tested on their ability to basically show mastery of basic, spelling, grammar, syntax, punctuation, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
The last part is the math part, which is an analytical reasoning. And when people look at this, they're like, oh, this is kind of like the SAT from the 1990s. The SAT didn't allow calculators until I believe 1994 or so. But I even remember sitting in class, in middle school, and the teacher saying, you can't use a calculator on the SAT, so you can't use one in my class either. And it all made sense to us. And then what happened is as soon as the SAT greenlit calculators, we had a whole generation of students that became dependent on using a device. And what's so tragic about that is that we forgot in that math is intended to be formative. Typically a student says, why do we got to learn this? And the teacher will say, well, you're going to use it someday. That's not a very good answer. In reality, math shapes us. It impresses upon our soul the reality of truth, of God in the universe itself in a very, very powerful way. So that last part of the test is going to be 40 math that include logic questions as well as up to pre-calc, but algebra 1, algebra 2, and geometry.
So this is fascinating to me because I remember this was several years ago. I was talking with a friend of mine in the parish who went on to get a master's in mathematics, passionate about his faith and all that. And I was telling him about my real discouragement in going through calculus, which was not a very pleasant experience for me. And he said something that was interesting. He said, I wonder if you ever really understood how math works. And I thought about that in other words, how does it relate to real life? And it sounds like that's kind of what you are kind of leaning toward as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's incredible to look at and there's an analogy to be made, I think that's so fascinating with the study of astronomy, right? Like the least practical thing you could ever study was astronomy in the ancient world. And now the entire modern economy basically runs on having satellites. We never dreamed there would be a practical application to it, but there was. And so math has to start off with math for its own sake rather than the usefulness of it as a discipline.
One of the things I was thinking about as you were talking, just putting myself in your world, and there I am. I'm looking at the SAT, I'm looking at the AP, and I'm saying this isn't right. This is not where education should lead us. And so I'm going to put together another assessment. So I sit down with a piece of paper. Where do I start? I mean, what's the first question or the first thing I'm going to write on a piece of paper? What was the approach that you used to build an entire assessment?
Father, I love to share this story because I remember sitting there and just thinking, well, what would be the first step? I didn't come from the world of standardized testing. I knew there were people out there who were psychometricians and they made tests. But I thought, well, what would be the first step? And I came to the conclusion that you would basically need a blueprint uh, of a new test to show colleges and universities. And as a college counselor, I already knew a lot of people in college admissions. And so I was able to call up folks at places like Thomas Aquinas College or Benedictine and Christendom and say, hey, if there was a test that reflected a TAC education or a Franciscan education, would that be of interest? And the response then was absolutely. We hate the SAT and ACT. There just aren't any other options. And so I thought, well, let's create an alternative. And what we did is we actually found a Harvard graduate who her job at the time was making SATs that were indistinguishable from a real SAT from the College Board. And I said, we need to create a blueprint, and I talked to her of the idea of source material. We want to be drawing from the great tradition, instead, from the Catholic tradition, from the Western intellectual tradition. She created the first blueprint. We sent it off to 5 or 6 colleges saying, would you be willing to include this as an alternative? The first college to adopt was Northeast Catholic, our Magdalene, in January of 2016. And after one did it, it was not too hard to get a second. And then we got a third. And with each one, it became a little bit easier. And the more colleges that changed their admission standards to include, and what we said to them is, look, there's a real catch-22 with creating a new standardized test. And this is the problem you realize really quickly is that a test cannot be standardized unless you have a ton of test takers. And you can't get a ton of test takers unless it's already standardized.
Right.
So how do you get out of that dilemma? And what we told colleges is, look, this is not a standardized test yet. It's not norm referenced, and we can't do that until we build up the volume of kids taking it. But would you tie it to admissions and scholarships before it's standardized, before it's norm referenced, out of a future vision of how this could be in your best interest as well, of having a college entrance exam that's missionally aligned? And I'm so indebted to Thomas More College of Liberal Arts, to Christendom, to TAC, to Hillsdale, to these early adopters, University of Dallas, Ave Maria.
It sounds a little bit like David going after 2 Goliaths.
It felt like that at the time. And in some ways, CLT was like a Hail Mary. I thought education was so broken. And I thought, well, you could change things in a radical way with a new college entrance exam. But I actually didn't think the chances of it working were very high. And in fact, my college roommate, who was our initial angel investor, he said, all right, give it to me straight. If you had to say there's a percentage chance that this would actually work, what would that be? And he's my friend. I didn't want to lie to him. I said, okay, best case scenario, 20% that it'll work. And praise God, it has worked, way more than I ever could have dreamed.
So in putting this together, really getting colleges to adopt it is one thing, but then what an impact on high schools. I mean, not only are you looking at bringing in a different inventory, a different assessment, but their education, their curriculum, everything is going to be impacted by this new approach. Is that correct?
100%, 100%. CLT adoption is never alone. CLT adoption is never, ever alone. Whenever a school adopts CLT, it always comes with curricular changes. On the math side, they say we've got to teach our students to be less dependent on a device. They say we need to be reading more philosophy. We need to be doing more church fathers. And so I believe moving from College Board to CLT allows schools to be more authentically Catholic.
And this is not just something that's taking place in the Catholic world, is it? You're looking much broader than that.
Oh yeah, and I always say, look, like I think one of the ironies of CLT is, I started it at a Catholic school to solve a problem that I was seeing in Catholic education, and it took off like wildfire in the non-Catholic world, in the Christian school world, in the classical charter school world. in the homeschool world. And in fact, the most difficult place for us to break into has been the Catholic school world. And in fact, but what is so funny is this: there are so many students who go to great classical Christian non-Catholic schools, and they receive a classical education. And then they convert to Catholicism or to Eastern Orthodoxy, or maybe they go high church Anglican. But essentially, I always want to make the argument of like, look, this kind of education is so powerful, it often makes non-Catholics Catholic. How is it that our Catholic schools are mimicking the public schools instead of, being the genuine article that they need to be?
What do you think is the big hesitancy? Is it that it won't allow their students to get into the colleges that they want to get into, or that it's just going to be a lot of work to kind of, work with our curriculum? What do you see as the big impediments?
Yeah, I think the big impediment is much bigger than CLT. I think it's deeply rooted in the history of Catholicism in America. I think it's the JFK problem of, we worked hard to be, mainstream and accepted in America. And like, we're kind of saying, no, we need to keep being really weird, And, the Catholic schools need to be in the business of setting academic standards, not borrowing academic standards from the public school. Really, the public schools that people are fleeing out of right now to get into classical schools or Catholic schools. And so we need to be standard bearers rather than looking to the public school for the academic standard. So I think there's a disruptiveness, there's a sunk cost fallacy. If a Catholic school has got 25 AP classes and they do the PSAT every year and the SAT every year, to go a different direction is a major decision. We get that, but we've got top Catholic schools now. I think of a school like J. Sarah, top school that Tim Bush founded and Rich Myers become a dear buddy, a great
Yeah.
Duke and Altum school, where they want to pursue both, academic excellence as a vehicle of the new evangelization. And they're seeing that CLT fits into that very nicely.
It's interesting that I know when I was at St. Michael, one of the phrases we used to use with people is that our job is to help get your kids to heaven, but we want them to go to college first. So we see the mission much more defined in terms of building a strong spirituality and anthropology so that our students can really understand who they are and why they are even alive.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, not to discount the need for learning academies and and the sciences, the hard sciences and all of that. So it's a daunting thing, but to me, it's just necessary for us to maintain that Catholic identity, but that Catholicity that kind of penetrates all of the different subjects.
Absolutely. And I would suggest to you that in many ways, and this isn't at all Catholic schools, but in many ways, I do think the College Board has taken the place of the magisterium of the Catholic Church in a lot of Catholic schools in terms of being the educational intellectual authority. And look, this was on an AP human geography test. We have so many examples, Father, that we could share, but this was just one. On an AP human geography practice test, they showed the students, they gave them two tables, and one table was death rates and the other was birth rates around the world in different countries. And then they asked the students, based on the tables, which country has made the most advances in female empowerment? Again, all they've given them is birth rates and death rates. That's it. And they've got to answer that question.
Wow.
Well, what was the answer? The answer they were supposed to pick was France, because France had the lowest birth rate. In other words, they had to completely reject the Catholic understanding of marriage and family in order to get the answer right, according to the College Board.
I think these kinds of understandings are something that people really need to grab a hold of. I'm hoping that maybe the message will get out, because that is so counterintuitive to everything that's a part of our faith.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it goes beyond AP human geography. Students get a warped, distorted view of the world when they take AP US. I mean, AP World History, in terms of the contribution of the church. I mean, we started the universities, the orphanages, the schools. And so we really want to dislodge the College Board over the next 15, 20 years and create a new standard of academic excellence. I mean, if you imagine an entity like the College Board that is deeply in love with the Catholic intellectual tradition, that's what we want to provide.
I want to talk a little bit more about AP in just a second, but one of the things that has been interesting to me is in the Catholic educational world at the K through 8 level, I'm seeing a lot of schools moving to a classical model.
Yeah.
And I'm also seeing things like the Chesterton Academy as a phenomenon on the high school level. But most of the high schools don't seem to be uh, working to kind of build I guess, a linear development for those going through a classical education at the younger grades. Is that an issue that you're looking at?
I think there's a lot of wrestling right now within the Catholic education world about how to understand this classical movement. I mean, in places like Texas, you've got Great Hearts and Valor, these free classical charter schools that you visit these schools. A lot of the teachers, the majority, are often faithful Catholics, and sometimes you'll even have parents go to a classical charter school because it's more authentically Catholic than the Catholic school. In fact, my dear buddy, he's the head of the Veritas School in Richmond, which is a flagship classical Christian school, non-Catholic. And he takes a lot of pride in the fact that there are 20% Catholic families there. And he has told the local Catholic schools, look, we're doing the church fathers, you're not. We're doing Latin, you're not. We are beating Catholic schools on Catholic identity as a Protestant school, right? I mean, that's how low a lot of Catholic schools have set the bar. So I do think although there continues to be a lot of debate about the word classical, I do think we're seeing a general movement to faithful Catholic education. And I think at some point when people make that move, I think you have to wrestle with the place of the College Board in our schools for sure. But Father, you look at all of these, I love these turnaround stories, places like Sacred Heart in Grand Rapids, a 120-year-old school, they were down to 70 students. Father Sirico came in and flipped it into a classical model, daily mass, and now they've got a wait list at every grade level. And we've seen the same story, with so many other schools throughout the country.
When we talk about classical, again, we can kind of throw that term around, but it would seem to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but if we have a Catholic high school that is truly representing the faith, allowing our faith to inform the subjects that we're teaching, it seems to me that there is a classical model or structure that is being introduced into that school. Would that be fair?
Absolutely. And this is the thing. There's no clear line of where a classical school would begin and not, right? To some degree, I mean, even the public schools, they're generally still reading some Shakespeare. And so there's really when I think of what does classical mean, to me, I think it means we're talking about the telos, the goal of education. The goal of education, the ancient goal, I believe, always was in the Catholic tradition and without the cultivation of virtue, the formation of character, uh, Christian sanctification in the Christian context, of course. That was the goal, along with passing down this beautiful intellectual tradition. So I think a lot of Catholics we can be our own worst enemies with getting in debates and fights over the word classical when really it's more of a spectrum.
So when we look at schools right now, I know at when I was at St. Michael, one of the things that when we had visiting parents come in, their questions always included something about how many AP classes do you offer?
Hmm.
And that's a real key thing. It's interesting that on a 4 point system, you can have individuals with a 5.0 grade point average. I'm exaggerating, but you know what I mean. These advanced placement tests, as well as there's also the International Baccalaureate, the IB. I understand that you're also looking at those areas as well for development of some material.
That's right. So we just announced at the Napa Institute this year, CLT launching an alternative to both International Baccalaureate program and advanced placement. And so, this has been, I think there's a real desire in Catholic schools for both academic excellence and faithful, fidelity to the church. I believe the College Board makes that nearly impossible, but so we need to offer, instead of just complaining about the College Board, we want to offer a better alternative that's actually more academically rigorous. The College Board, their vision over the next 5 or 10 years is AP for everyone, AP for everyone, right? Fully egalitarian. And so therefore it ceases to be what it used to be in terms of being something truly academically excellent, for a small band of students. So we're going to be starting with the classes that are in the humanities, where I think the offensive of the College Board are kind of more egregious. So alternatives to AP Lit, to AP Lang, to AP US, to AP World. We're going to be rolling these out in the 26-27 academic year.
Do you have a name for this?
We do. It's enduring courses.
Enduring courses. Okay, so you take EC classes.
Yeah, so we have a number of founding partners, including JSerra that we mentioned earlier, but a number of great colleges as well, University of Dallas, Benedictine. And so, the first couple years, it may be that an enduring course, a final exam, is only good for credit at, 80 or 100 colleges. But we're going to be adding to that number every year as time goes by.
That's really quite quite a goal. I really am excited about watching how this really does unfold. And again, it's a matter not only of having it rolled out in high schools, but also for colleges to accept these enduring course credits.
That's right. It's kind of this two-sided problem, but what we have found is that on both sides of the problem, the Catholic high schools, they're not thrilled with the College Board. They feel like they're in between a rock and a hard place often. If they get rid of College Board and AP, they know they're going to probably lose students. And if they keep it, they know they're going to be compromised on mission to some degree. And on the college side, they don't really like it either. But if they say we're not going to accept any credits from AP, then colleges that do accept the credits are going to get those great students. And so it's this weird conundrum where neither the school, the high schools, or the colleges are happy with College Board, and which means it's really prime for disruption.
So, what has the reception been like for, especially now the enduring courses are still yet to be rolled out, but like with the classical learning test, what's your feedback from high schools, from colleges that are utilizing your materials?
Yeah, it's been really, really wonderful. And I've been blown away with the schools that have been willing to, we have about 30 or 35, what we're calling founding partners for enduring courses. And what we tried to do was identify flagship schools that are Catholic or classical charter or classical Christian or Christian non-classical or homeschool leaders. There's all these kind of different lanes and stakeholders. And so we've had these, and I think almost every school that we've invited to be a founding partner. We live in an influencer age. We see this on social media, but it's also true for schools. And so you take a school like JSerra, and a lot of schools watch. What is JSerra doing? And they're gonna follow their example. And so what we want to do is identify those schools that have influence and make our case to them that mission aligned assessments and courses matter. And it's been I've been really blown away with the schools that have been receptive to being a part of this so far.
And as you keep moving forward, do you see anything else in the future, or do you think you have your hands full between the CLT and the enduring courses?
Yeah, so we've said kind of from the beginning, we want to challenge the College Board on every front. And for them, the two big fronts are, of course, AP and the SAT, PSAT. And so now with enduring courses, we'll have that kind of full suite to go after the College Board. And it's one thing I love about the free market, excellence wins. And you beat the competition by serving people better. You beat the competition by providing something more meaningful and excellent, more beautiful. And I think Catholic schools are going to see that, and this is the thing that people forget. Young people, they want this. They don't want, a shallow education in temporal things. They want the genuine article of themselves. And I think I think we're at the beginning of an incredible renaissance in liberal education, and that the Catholic school is going to be at the heart of that movement. Well, Father Sly, thank you for the encouraging words and the feedback, and it's wonderful to be with you today. We're big fans here of Duke and Altum, and grateful to be one of your strategic partners.
Well, Jeremy, it's been really good to have you. And I'm just wondering, if people want to know more about Classic Learning Test, where should they go?
Yeah, cltexam.com is our website. And you can find us on all social media platforms as well.
Okay. Jeremy Tate, thank you so much again for being with us today on Follow to Lead. And for more information about the Duke and Altum Schools Collaborative, please visit our website at diaschools.org. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to our YouTube channel or follow our podcast, and be sure to leave a comment to encourage us toward future programs. May Almighty God bless you.
We'd like to thank you for joining us on this episode of Follow to Lead, a production of the Duke and Altum Schools Collaborative. To learn more about finding your own path in your journey of faith, or for more information on what we discussed in today's episode, you are invited to follow us on social media and visit us on the web at diaschools.org. To provide a one-time donation or monthly pledge, please visit our website. Your gift will aid us in providing up-to-date information, additional resources, and other support on how to take Catholic education to a higher level. We look forward to helping you follow God's call to lead others to God right here on Follow to Lead.